and welcome back to Why This Film, the podcast where we reach back into your childhood, pluck at a movie, give it a rewatch, and have a chat about it. I'm Emily Slade, and welcome back. You watched it so many times before, and now you're gonna watch it again. But it's been so many years since you last saw it, and now you show it to your friends, and they're like, what?
What am I watching?
Why this film? And I'm joined today by Brett from the Demographicast. Hello.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Welcome. You're very welcome. Your chosen movie is 1992's Wayne's World. The IMDb breakdown. Two slacker friends try to promote their public access cable show. That's a very short intro there.
Very...
Brief, to the point.
Yeah. Two slacker friends. Interesting. I hadn't seen that before.
Yeah, IMDb is so funny. They can just be like, I've looked at the poster and I assume the movie, that's how it feels anyway.
Right.
And I assume that that's what the movie's about.
Yeah.
But yeah, why this film?
Well, basically, I grew up watching this film basically every weekend. My parents were really into the film. I think probably because they grew up listening to sort of rock music and were big on the in the rock scene in the 80s. Mm-hmm. And then this film came out in the early 90s, and I think it was a bit of like as well as it being tongue-in-cheek and a bit of a mockery of the scene, it's also kind of a bit of a love letter to it. And then I'm also into that kind of music, obviously, because I grew up on it from my parents' influence. Yeah. And so watching this film kind of transported me a little bit back to that, just because I hadn't lived through it. So I think it was a way for me to relate.
Oh, that's really nice.
Yeah. And also, it's a really good film. It's quite funny. I watched it again in preparation for this, and there are some cringy moments. It's there are aspects of it that are a bit dated, but then at the same time, I don't know. It's just fun, and it's quite a comfort film for me.
Yeah. Were you aware of the SNL sketches that led up to the film?
Yeah, I was. Yeah. So Mike Myers and I have. Is it Alan Carvey or something? Anna Carvey? I don't know. The guy who plays Garth in the film.
Dana
Carvey. That's it. So they did like it was originally a sketch of theirs on SNL where they'd do their sort of Wayne's World intro and pretend to be these guys really into heavy metal, and it kind of somehow turned into a film. I'm not entirely sure how.
Yeah, there was a real sort of thing in that time. You don't really see it much nowadays, where SNL characters, if they became big enough, they basically got a movie.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was a little bit skeptical. I had never really properly seen Wayne's World.
Yeah.
I was vaguely aware of the concept, and I'd seen like the memes. There's some quite famous bits from it that have done the rounds on the internet over the years. And I was like, I'm really worried I'm gonna really not enjoy this movie. But it's so charmingly funny that I couldn't help myself. Like, as you said, there are moments where you're like, but they're really few between. They get a lot of stuff right, and it really is quite timelessly endearing, which I was quite shocked about, because I don't trust Mike Myers as far as I can throw him. But I was like, this is why he became Mike Myers.
Yeah.
This is so cool and fresh. It felt fresh, like them singing along to Bohemian Rhapsody in the car at the beginning of the movie. That's very famously, like, if people think of Wayne's World, I think that's the first thing people possibly think of. And I was watching it and I was like, this isn't new to me. As someone sort of watching it for the first time in 2021, it's not new, but it has a feeling that I believe at the time it probably was quite new. Like, people hadn't seen film characters do that sort of thing before. And by the time we got to the end of the sequence, it had completely won me over. And I was like, that was just so relatable and fun. And that's sort of how the movie goes along. I love that they talk to the camera.
Yes.
I think that's very clever.
Yeah.
Because it allows this sort of bizarre vibe to the whole thing. I love how it doesn't take itself seriously, but it has enough serious stuff in it that it's not a complete waste of time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. No, I couldn't agree more. The whole, I was thinking it again watching it yesterday, that it, like you say, it doesn't take itself too seriously. There's so many times where it sort of makes jokes about the direction, or like there's one point where they see Alice Cooper in a concert, and then they end up going backstage, but they find themselves outside, and there's a random security guard who just gives a bunch of exposition leading up to the sort of the end of the film, and they make a joke about this security guard seemingly knowing way too much for a security guard.
Yeah. It was so enjoyable, and again it sort of felt like that sort of thing hadn't ever really happened before, like very coyly looking. And again it's Mike Myers' performance of looking to the camera knowingly, being like, that was an incredibly helpful security guard releasing a lot of information he perhaps shouldn't really know about or whatever. And it was so fun, and they're so lovable. Again, I was really worried that this was gonna be like two... Basically, Ghostbusters opens with Bill Murray trying to sexually harass a teenager. Yeah. And it sucks. Yeah. And I've got no time for it. And I was really worried this was going to be the same thing, where sort of the 80s and 90s SNL jokes came from, haha, women are beautiful, and we have a right to look at them, or whatever. And because I also knew that one of the most famous things from Wayne's World was the, like, what do they say? Is it like swing?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Where they sort of thrust their crotches in the air,
towards women, saying swing. Yeah. And I was like, uh-oh. But again, I wasn't offended by it because of the context of it, because of how they do it, because of who they are. And also the relationship that Wayne has with Cassandra was so shockingly sweet and respectful, and she was such a great character. I mean, she's Nani from Lilo and Stitch, so instantly I was like, fucking yes. But I was so blown away with how like sweet it all was, and how charming and funny, and like fucking Rob Lowe is the movie's villain, and he like steals every scene that he's in. And it's just a real testament to the, like, comedy and, like, old SNL, and how classic they were with their comedy, and yet also quite new. It felt like they were pushing boundaries whilst also adhering to the sort of tropes of how to be funny.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, real, like... really blown away with how much I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I'm interested. I'm glad to hear that you weren't necessarily didn't find it super offensive, the whole the swing thing and the she's a babe thing.
Yeah,
it's like, because I find it's something that I wasn't sure what to think of when I rewatched it. I've rewatched it a couple of times in the last year over lockdowns and stuff. But during those moments, I'm like, is that offensive? Is that normal? But like you say, their characters are so inoffensive in themselves. Yeah. They're so there's no like machoism, there's no egos, there's
exactly.
And that's actually something that I quite like in terms of like the way it reflects, or it shows the sort of rock scene, because
oh my gosh,
all of the bands that they like, all of the band members of those bands, most of them are dickheads. So it's quite nice to see these fans of this music that don't reflect that are decent guys.
And I mean,
likable.
Absolutely. They so easily could have just been arseholes. And like entitled. Especially because you've got this what would now be possibly verging on like an incel type character of Wayne, who works in fast food joints and lives in his mum's basement and does this cable show where he like it makes fun of other people, is the sort of basis of the show. but it's so not Reddit vibes.
Yes.
It's so not 4chan. It's none of those things. It's very sweet and nice, and taking this stereotype and doing something really wholesome with it. And you're right, they're doing schwing and they're calling people babes, and it was very reminiscent of Bill and Ted, who do a similar thing, who again are so inoffensive that you're just like, oh.
Yeah.
Like,
they're very much the same kind of films, the Bill and Ted films and the Wayne's World films.
Definitely.
Very similar.
And I wondered if this was a sort of homage, or whether both of them were just drawing from the same sources of the sort of fandom that they were using as inspiration.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think
Which
it's
one
more
came out
that.
first? I don't actually
Bill
know.
and Ted came out first, surprisingly. Yeah.
Right.
But I think it's more, that they're drawing from the same source material than they're trying to be a reflection on the previous movie. Because immediately after he's like swinged towards Cassandra, he then approaches her and is like, please, may I have your number? And she declines, and he goes, okay, and walks away. And then the next time he approaches again and he's like, can we have a chat? And she's like, okay. And he's taken the time to like learn her language.
Yeah.
I was a bit confused by that, because I believe that woman is Hawaiian, but in this she's Cantonese.
Yeah.
I had more of a problem with that than I did with like anything else. But yeah, and because he's very respectful and he's very nice, and Garth's was a bit different. Garth has this like dream woman, but I think it was more meant to be a joke and a trope than him genuinely like pursuing this nameless, speechless woman.
Yeah.
And because we had Cassandra, Dream Woman had her place within the context of the movie.
Yeah.
So again, if Dream Woman had been the only woman in the movie, I'd have been like, this is bullshit.
Yeah.
But we had a good one. And then you compare them to Rob Lowe, and it's that classic sort of like capitalism versus artist. And Rob Lowe is the sort of sleaze, but even by being a sleaze, the worst we get is the joke that makes Cassandra leave him at the end, where he's holding a snake and she's like, is that you or the snake? And it's funny, and it's meaningful because it pushes her to go with Wayne. Because up until then, he's just been incredibly rich and charming. He's not been aggressive or mean, or any of these normal sort of villainous traits. You know, he doesn't slap anyone. He doesn't it was just all very sort of respectful. Surprisingly enough. You made another point that I wanted to go on to. Yes, and to go back to how they represent the heavy metal fandom and the people within it, and how nicely they do that. It was so amusing to me when they met Alice Cooper, and he starts giving them the sort of history of Milwaukee.
Yeah, that's one of my favourite gags.
Very articulately, and it's such a clever joke, because the sort of joke is that your expectations not being met. It's not disrespectful to anyone. It's not implying anyone's a certain way. It's just like, you thought we were going to be doing cocaine off of strippers' buttholes, but actually we're having a lovely discussion about Milwaukee and its history.
Yeah. I love it. I love the tone that he takes as well. Like he's a lecturer and...
Yeah. It's such a brilliant performance from Alice Cooper. And like, what a gem for agreeing to do it.
Yeah.
And it was so much fun. It felt so iconic. Because I knew he was in this movie, but I didn't know to what capacity.
Sure.
And so I really, really enjoyed that. And the fact that Wayne and Garth weren't sort of taken aback by it. They were in a sense, just purely because they just sort of didn't have anything to contribute to the conversation. But they weren't like freaking out and saying you should be doing this and you should be doing that or anything. So again, just really fun. It's easygoing. It's a really easygoing movie where I didn't feel threatened at any point. One of the running jokes is that one of the crew members will confess his love to a man. He does it to Wayne, and then he does it to the sort of studio exec.
Yeah.
And he'll like come up to them and be like, I love you, man. And they're like, oh yeah, no, I love you too. And he's like, no, you don't get it, I love you. And they would become uncomfortable with that. But again, it rode that line between like, until the ending at least, it rode that line between like, is this a man who is gay trying to confess his love to men who are straight and are uncomfortable with the fact that he's gay? Or is it something else? Are the reactions homophobic, or are they just a bit confused? And then right at the end, it's like, I've learnt that two men can have platonic love.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, so are we making it okay to say that men can say that they love each other? Is that the message here? Or is it that you're desperately trying to stamp down any homosexual undertones? Like, I wasn't quite sure how to feel. I don't know what you felt.
My I think I've never really got the homophobic, that it could potentially be homophobic, but then I grew up watching it, so I don't know if I necessarily, saw it from that angle as a kid, and therefore I've just carried that on. But when I watch it now, to me, it appears to me more like he's saying he loves them he's trying to show affection. He's a straight guy trying to show affection to other straight guys, and they get uncomfortable because they're not as comfortable with their sexualities, maybe, or they it's just not a norm to say, that it's for guys to say that they love each other.
Yeah.
That's how it comes across to me. But
yeah, and I think you're right, because all of the sort of reactions around it and all of the action that comes from it don't lead to sort of any other thing. That's sort of what it always implies. And then right at the end, they sort of confirm it, where they're like, it's cool that men should be able to say that they love each other.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny that they've kind of, because it is all leading up to that final thing in the finale, right? It's just a joke to then be able to say men should be able to say they love each other, which is it's quite nice. Yeah, it is quite nice. Yeah, yeah,
and quite progressive.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think again, because it was the 90s, because it was an SNL sketch, I think my brain was instantly like scanning for offence.
Right,
I was like,
sure.
Where is this going? What are they trying to say? Oh God, this is a little bit uncomfortable. But it also wasn't uncomfortable. It was like my brain was like freaking out that it might be uncomfortable. And it just felt more sort of awkward.
Yeah, for sure.
Stuff.
In terms of Cassandra's character, there was one thing I noticed particularly when we were watching it yesterday, which I can't believe I hadn't noticed before, considering how many times I've seen it. But it was like, I'm just going back to what you were saying about Rob Lowe's character, Benjamin. The whole, he is clearly trying to, come onto her throughout the film. But every time that Cassandra sort of is approached about him, or he contacts her, she is quite clearly not into him. Yes. And I liked that. I liked that they didn't just, that she's quite a powerful character, really. She's quite, she knows what she wants, and they didn't just give her the trope of, she's getting seduced by this guy, and she's that wasn't a thing. I don't think it was more of the what drives that kind of storyline is Wayne being insecure about it, and Benjamin's character's clearly going after her, but she isn't really playing a part in that. She's really only interested in Benjamin because he's offering her a music video contract.
Yeah, no, completely agree. I really, really loved that. Absolutely, because it would have been so easy for her to have been, and they lay it out. Like, Garth gives us a tour of his home. Yeah. And it's like, we've got champagne, we've got a nice car, we've got a big apartment, we've got these books, how to pick up chicks. And I really liked all of it, how it played out. I liked how Benjamin never lost his temper. He never fell into that trope. She never fell for his charm. She never falls into that. And you're absolutely right. It all stems from Wayne's insecurities, which is a brilliant character arc for him.
Yeah.
Who is the main character, rather than using these other people as weird foils. So yeah, again, it was very progressive in a lot of what it was trying to do, and I really, really appreciate it. I thought she was an absolutely amazing character. I love when he rings her late at night, and like it's almost quite subtle, because he's like checking in on her, making sure that she's still okay for the video, but trying to plant these things to make her forget Wayne, or like blah 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 blah, and she's very confused and like puts the phone down and is like, what the fuck was that about? Whereas Wayne is the one that's falling for it, where the woman usually would, almost in a way, in other lesser movies. So again, I was just like, I feel so I feel like, you know, if Mike Myers, if you're listening to this, I'm so sorry. Like, I've had too much of you from Shrek. Like, I don't know why. It's because I don't like Austin Powers, because everything that we're saying that's good about Wayne's World is then done in Austin Powers, and it's awful.
Yeah. They're very opposite characters, aren't they, really, in that respect?
Very much so. Like, Austin Powers is full-on misogyny, penis jokes, like all the stuff that I expected to find here and was nowhere to be seen. All of the crew and the band members as well, despite having the look of the heavy metal with the like rock body and the long hair, always very sweet, always very nice. And just very innocent, considering. I've got a note here that says the coffee guy, but I can't quite remember.
Oh yeah, there's like a diner, isn't there, that they keep going to?
Oh yeah.
And the guy who owns the diner, every time it cuts to him, he's always talking about murdering someone, or like.
I absolutely love it. He's the only other character that talks to camera, and it's established very early on by Garth, where he's like, no, only we can talk to the camera. And like we go into this like diner of donuts and coffee, and he's like, I killed a man. Like, what the fuck? I really, really love him as a character.
Yeah, it's like, what's his like first line? His first line's like, when you kill a guy in the heat of battle, it's considered heroic, but when you kill a man in the heat of passion, it's murder. It's
murder. And then like every time someone like, I was laid off, and he's like, I bet you want to go and find the guy that did it and rip his still beating heart out of his chest so he can look at it one last time before he dies. And you're like, I love this man so much. So much fun. Even the like. There was a police officer who I imagine, I didn't get it, but I imagine there was I recognised Meatloaf, but I imagine there was quite a lot of SNL cameos throughout this movie that I didn't pick up on because I don't know who anyone is.
Yeah, I didn't.
Like I think Chris Farley was in there at some point. I think he was the security guard.
Yeah, he is the security guard, yeah.
So some SNL people littered about, which is inevitable and fun if you know who you're looking for.
Yeah.
I was just like, the camera is lingering on them, and that person has one too many lines to be like an additional cast member. But yeah, the police officer, his running joke is that he was doing like drug searches, like cavity searches, and that could so easily have been very crass and very unfunny. But again, because the tone of the movie, and therefore the sort of Scooby-Doo-ish tone that all of the people have, it's really funny. And then when it comes to fruition later on, where he does one on Benjamin, and then Benjamin has that shot of leaving the car going into Wayne's home after receiving the cavity search, not only is it really, really funny, like it's genuinely quite funny, they show it like 3 or 4 times because they keep, and it never got old. And so again, just really clever, subtle bits of like humour, like using the film format. Because another SNL movie that we've done on this podcast before was Superstar.
Right.
And it was really, really good, and I liked it for the messages, but it was very much following a more traditional high school movie trope. Like here is a character and we're putting her in a film where she would work, sort of thing. It still had that bizarre sense of humour, but this one feels a lot fresher, almost like they're trying new things and they're really using the format of film to their advantage. Whereas Superstar felt a bit more like, we've put this character and now they're in a movie.
Yeah.
Whereas here it's like, we know we're going to use film, so what can we do with these characters and the medium of film? And I think that's why people have heard of it more than they've heard of Superstar. People have watched it more than they watched Superstar. So I think that was a really clever thing for them to do. Definitely.
Yeah, definitely. I wanted to bring it because I did some notes as well when I was watching it last night, and one of my notes is just that it's clever and dumb.
Yes.
Because, like we're saying, a lot of these jokes are quite clever, but the joke in itself generally is so really dumb.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly it. It's that beautiful juxtaposition.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I was so taken aback by it, because I was like, this is so well thought out. It's clearly a lot of people who cared put a lot of effort into this. Like the product placement. Benjamin comes to talk to Wayne to talk about how he needs to have this interview with the sponsor because product placement is important. And while Wayne does his monologue of absolutely not, I'm an artist, I can't possibly sell out, he's obviously showcasing Pizza Hut and Pepsi and these sort of drugs and it is so dumb. It's such a dumb concept. On paper it's like, that's silly. But the way it's done is so clever and it's iconic. It's one of the more memorable, I think, scenes from this movie as well. Because I wouldn't be surprised if they genuinely had all of those sponsorships, because the soundtrack is amazing.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Because they've managed to get, I mean, they got Alice Cooper for one. He can't have been cheap.
No.
And they've managed to get so many good songs.
Yeah. From big bands as well.
Huge bands. Like I'm not really into the heavy metal scene, but I recognised the songs that were being sung, which shows how sort of big that they are, that they've crawled into other genres.
Yeah.
And I was shocked again, sort of comparing it to Superstar, which felt quite low budget. This felt like it had a budget. Like, people put money behind this.
It doesn't feel cheap at any point. There's nothing where you're like, oh, they could have done a bit more money there.
Yeah,
It's
definitely.
Yeah.
And again, I think it's smartness as well, because we have the same establishing shot of Wayne's home, like a lot.
Yeah.
So that's obviously reused tape, and we don't have too many locations either.
No.
So it was just very cleverly made, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and the sets are quite simple generally, like whether it's like Cassandra's flat or whatever. Yeah, I imagine it probably doesn't cost too much for that.
Yeah. And they possibly use the same locations to, like, Cassandra's flat might have also become Wayne's flat.
Yeah,
and, like,
true.
The studio that is Wayne's flat is also clearly Wayne's flat.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's just all very clever.
Did you have a favourite joke at all?
Oh, man. That is such a good question. Okay, so I exclaimed out loud. I'm not sure if it counts as a joke. I think it does. I think it counts as a joke. And I love this trope anyway. Garth has a dog.
Yeah.
And it has Garth's hair. And they do the joke of the, like, Wayne's trapped down a well.
Yeah.
Oh, no, he's just outside. And the dog came into the room and I made a noise out loud. Like, oh my goodness. Give that dog an Oscar. Like, beautiful. And it's a lassie dog.
Yeah.
It was, mwah, beautiful. That's off the top of my head. What was yours?
I mean, there are so many great moments. Like, I love the sponsors segment thing, and then, like you said earlier, the Alice Cooper gag is super funny. My favourite joke, and it apparently was an improv joke, was the one where Wayne and Garth are sitting on their the hood of their car, and Garth is like, "Did you ever find Bugs Bunny attractive when he put on a dress and some makeup or whatever?" And Wayne just bursts out laughing, and then he's like, "No, me neither." But that joke is just so random and out of nowhere.
It is.
Apparently it is improv, and actually, I noticed yesterday, if you watch it and you listen to Wayne laughing, you can hear Garth laughing in the background. So it's pretty funny. But.
Oh my god. Yeah, I really enjoyed that moment. It's, again, there's so much that happens in Wayne's World that says so much. Like, even though it's improvised, it sums up their friendship. Like, they sit on the hood of their car as the planes are going by to get a sort of roller coaster rush, I assume.
Yeah.
Which 100% is the type of thing that these people would do, I imagine.
Yeah, for sure.
And while they're there, they just sit and contemplate life and ask, like, questions to each other, and it shows their friendship. And like, it's just a genuinely funny line as well. And it's a whole world. It's a whole, like, no wonder it spawned a sequel. I mean, I don't know what happens in the sequel.
It's pretty good. It's a bit, the story arc is maybe not as, or like the plot in general is probably not as good as the first one. But I'd say there are, in terms of like the comedy, there are fewer jokes that really make you laugh. But when they do, they're better than some of the ones in the first film.
Oh, wow.
It's a pretty decent film. If you enjoyed the first one, I would recommend the second one as well.
Yeah, nice. And are you a fan of the Austin Powers movies?
I've only seen one of them.
It's okay if you are.
I've only seen one of them, and I can't remember which one it is.
Oh, okay.
But I do quite enjoy it. Yeah, I just like his. Again, it's really dumb humor. And I know that there are, nowadays it's a bit, there are places where it's a bit cringy and it's a bit like, that wouldn't fly now, but.
Yeah, I think it holds up less than Wayne's World does. Wayne's World holds up, like it holds up, full stop, I think, I would say. But Austin Powers, I remember my most recent rewatch, I really struggled with it. I was like, this was hilarious when I was 14.
Sure.
And now I'm nearly 30 and it's not quite as funny anymore. But then I'm not a fan of James Bond, so maybe I'm not getting it in that sense as a parody. And James Bond is sexist, so that it sort of had to be sexist to parody it.
Sure.
Obviously, iconic moments. I love Dr. Evil and his board of people. And everything they do is hilarious. But Austin Powers himself, I'm a bit like, no thank you.
Yeah, sure. No, I get that.
Whereas Wayne is really endearing as a character.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, you could definitely get on board. You're rooting for him and Garth, basically, throughout.
Very much so.
Yeah. It's one of those films that's just, it's become, I think, even more popular as time has gone on, because it's kind of it's a cult classic, really. It's one of those films that's got a cult following, and I don't know how well it did in the box office when it first came out 30 years ago. Crazy.
So long ago.
But
let's see if I can find it.
But yeah, it's definitely something that it's one of those films that people go back to.
Definitely, and I can see why. So it made 183.1 million.
Okay.
At the box office.
That's decent.
Yeah, you always see it's like a popular Halloween costume that sort of never dies.
Yes, yeah, that's true.
Box office success, debuting at number 1. Domestic gross was huge. It was the 8th highest grossing film of 1992.
Oh, okay, did very well then.
Is of course the highest grossing of the 11 films based on Saturday Night Live skits.
Really? There's 11? Oh, okay. I don't think I've seen any others.
No. They're all a bit strange. Superstar I've seen, and then I'm aware of like Coneheads. Like I've seen that poster a lot.
Yes, I've seen like you say, I've seen the poster, but I had no idea what it's about, really. Yeah,
but I've never. Right, and it was the success of Wayne's World, it seems, that spurned on more movies, spin-offs.
That makes sense.
Which makes sense, but unfortunately, I don't think they quite had the magic that was Wayne's World. That, as you said, that it worked with this idea of using film as a medium, talking to the camera is genius. The like 3 endings because the stakes are the perfect amount of energy, where I sort of knew everything was going to be okay, and I hoped it would be okay because I liked the characters. And then they sort of do 3 endings, sort of very Clue-ish. Where the first ending is where everything sucks. And it's funny because you know that they're not going to end it like that. Then they do a Scooby-Doo ending where it was Old Man Withers, who we met at the beginning of the movie, and I very, very, very much enjoyed that. And then we had the like super awesome happy ending, which was really fun because it ended with like monologues to the camera rather than like action being filmed. And then it just sort of ended, and I was like, oh, okay.
I love that they do that sort of monologue to the camera where it's all like cheesy, you know. Them saying, you know, whatever that is. I can't even remember what they say. But...
like, I've learned the error of my ways. You can't get very far being a capitalist pig.
All this classic stuff, all this sort of tropey, sort of happy stuff to end the film with, and then they're like, their final joke is they're just going fished, and like they're pretending that they've hooked you in to this joke that, you know, it ended in such a happy way, but again, it's almost mocking the audience at the end. Because
but I was happy for them too. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, me too. Because it just doesn't. It goes back to the whole not taking yourself seriously.
And I really love a movie that doesn't take itself seriously, but I feel like it's much more difficult than people think, because it feels like it ought to be so easy to not care. Because that's the vibe that you're giving off. That you haven't bothered to come up with a plot and you're copping out at the ending. But to earn that carelessness, they had to put in a lot of work throughout. And
they clearly do care. Whoever wrote it clearly did care about the script as well. Like
definitely. I think they wanted it to be a success, and good for them it was, and still is. You're absolutely right with it being a cult classic. It's their costumes are so iconic and simple, which is what most people look for in a Halloween costume. So really, really surprised at how much I enjoyed it, and it's like growing on me the farther I get away from it as well. And the character of Wayne, I mean, there's that wonderful moment where he Cassandra's on the phone to her drummer.
I was just thinking of that as well,
and he's just like walking around in his underwear, just like doing really dumb stuff, trying to distract her on the phone, and it's genuinely funny. She's really enjoying it, and you never feel... I was really worried it was going to be like a... oh no, Wayne is like Peter Griffin and Cassandra is like Lois, where it's got that sort of like ugly loser boy and the like really hot, unattainable woman. But you know why she's with him, and you know why they're together and they work, and he's got a lot going for him. And I was worried as well that there was going to be a whole subplot about them being duped out of the right amount of money, because Benjamin has that wonderful line where he's like, we are going to pay you, but of course I did warn him that you were artists and you don't care about the money, so I'm perfectly happy to rip up these checks right now. Which I thought was really funny and really good. But that's not a thing. They do have the money. He gets his guitar. And all of these things. So it's definitely one you can stick on a lot. Like, it's not heavy.
No, exactly.
It's a lot of fun.
For me, it always used to be like an early Saturday morning film that I put on. I had the cassette, or we had the cassette when I was young. It was,
is that like the soundtrack, or is it like the story as well?
No, as in like the VHS, sorry, is what I meant, not the cassette.
Oh, sorry.
Like the VHS, amazing. We had to wind it back every weekend when I used to put it on.
Hell yeah. Nice. Yeah. Any more notes? No. Just, really, really enjoyed it. So thank you so much for bringing it on.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me on and for showcasing it, because I feel like it's something, like, I'm glad that you enjoyed it particularly, because I was kind of worried that it would just be something that somebody like me who grew up with a family who were into that kind of music and into that kind of film would enjoy. But I'm glad that it's something that is more accessible for just, anyone really. Yeah, I really was surprised with how accessible it was. It just has a really endearing, funny charm about it that stems from the two main characters and the choices that they made with the other characters as well. Like it opens with a woman watching Wayne's World in bed with Rob Lowe. Yeah. And she's like, they're being so dumb. They're sort of, I imagine, showcasing one of the old SNL skits of what they would do for Wayne's World. Yeah. And it's so stupid and a little bit mean-spirited and clunky, and I was really... That's when I started to worry, and I was like, oh God, the intro is not great, I don't think. Yeah, it's interesting how then it completely shifts. Yeah, as soon as Wayne starts talking to the camera, it's instantly better, but that first intro segment is a bit cringy. Because it's just
but it works in the sense that it's so cringe, and this woman, again, this like beautiful woman who really has no business watching Wayne's World, you would think, because what is it about it that's attractive to you? Is like, yeah, this show is so popular, like it's so good, everybody loves it. And Rob Lowe is so sarcastic. He's practically like looking to the camera a la The Office, being like, yes, of course, it's incredible.
Yeah, like clearly they're geniuses.
Clearly they're geniuses. And it's that tone that he brings in where he, as I say, he never gets angry. And I find that so funny and good, because he's always just like, Wayne's an idiot.
He kind of almost doesn't show any emotions as well.
Yeah.
Right? He's kind of very, he doesn't
cold,
vary at all. Yeah, very cold. Yeah. But still.
But it works so well.
It does, yeah. It does.
Even when he's like, literally, like, yeah, it's just a brilliant performance. I really enjoyed it, and I thought it worked really well. And the second he said they're clearly geniuses, I was like, oh, good. This movie knows what it's doing.
Sure.
Because I've just watched something that I could have turned off straight away because I was like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah.
But Rob Lowe saying, clearly they're geniuses, I was like, cool. I'm going to let you take me through this movie now. And as you say, the second he turns to the camera, I'm like, love it.
Yeah.
And it just rises from there.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
Yeah, really, really interesting opening, and really great ending. And lots of good stuff in between. But yeah, so where can the people find you?
So they can find me specifically hosting a politics/social issues podcast called the Demographicast. It's on all podcast platforms. Otherwise, you can also find me I produce a bunch of sort of online web series shows with a business that I run called DGN, the Demographic Network. So if you just sort of look that up on any social media platforms, then we're on those.
Nice.
Thank you for having me, Emily.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. This was such a joy. I love it. I love it when I'm like, I don't know about this movie, man. And then I actually give it a chance because someone's like, I love it.
Yeah. I'd be super interested to hear what you think of Wayne's World 2 now after as well.
Well, you've got to come on and do Wayne's World 2.
Yes, let's do that.
That's how we're going to do that. So, perfect. Cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
And we'll see you next time on Why This Film. Bye!